An elderly millionaire man poses as a beggar to test a poor waitress by asking for a free fast food meal. What happens next leaves her stunned. The small diner buzzed with the usual morning chatter as customers trickled in, looking for a quick breakfast before the day picked up its hurried pace. In the middle of it all was Sarah, a young woman with a bright smile and warm, welcoming presence. She moved between tables with practiced ease, greeting regulars, taking orders, and occasionally pausing to ask a customer how their day was going. Despite the whirlwind around her, Sarah never let her smile waver. To the world, she was just another waitress, but to those who took a closer look, she was the heart of the diner. Sarah's story was anything but easy. At just 24, she was already shouldering responsibilities that weighed heavily on her young shoulders. Growing up in a low-income household had taught her the value of hard work early on, and when her family hit a rough patch after her father's passing, Sarah had stepped up without hesitation. She took on this waitressing job to help pay her family's bills and put herself through college. Every dollar she earned went toward supporting her younger siblings and her mother, who had fallen ill and couldn't work. Each morning, Sarah would rise before the sun, making her way to the diner to work her shifts, balancing trays and orders as though it was second nature. The long hours, the occasional rude customer, the weight of financial stress, none of it managed to break her spirit. Sarah was known among the regulars for her kindness and patience, qualities that made her stand out in a job that could often wear people down. She always seemed to find something good in each person she met, and her genuine warmth had a way of making even the most hurried patrons pause for a moment. What most people didn't know was that Sarah was paying off not only her student debt, but also medical bills from her mother's treatments, leaving her with little to save for herself. Yet she rarely complained. Her focus was on making things better for her family, one step at a time. Even on the most challenging days, she found reasons to keep pushing forward, knowing that her sacrifices were making a difference for the people she loved. One crisp autumn morning, as Sarah was preparing the coffee station, the diner's door opened, and in walked an elderly man she hadn't seen before. His clothes were worn and wrinkled, his hat slightly askew, and his shoes scuffed from what looked like years of use. He carried an old leather bag slung over his shoulder and looked around the diner with a hint of uncertainty in his gaze. Curious about the new face, Sarah walked over, greeting him with her signature smile. "Good morning, sir. Would you like a booth or a seat at the counter?" The man, who looked to be in his late 60s or early 70s, paused before offering her a polite nod. "A booth, if you don't mind," he murmured, his voice soft yet steady. Sarah led him to a booth by the window, setting down a menu in front of him. "Can I get you some coffee to start?" The man looked at her with a hesitant expression before nodding. "Just coffee for now, thank you." As Sarah moved away to fetch his coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something peculiar about him. She knew most of the regulars who frequented the diner, and her intuition told her he wasn't from the area. There was a quiet dignity in his demeanor, despite his humble appearance. What Sarah didn't know was that the man, David, was no ordinary customer. Beneath his worn-out clothes and quiet demeanor lay the truth. David was a millionaire, a man of significant wealth and success. But he had come here with a purpose. After years of watching people in his line of work put on facade and play games for money, David had become disillusioned with wealth and success. He wanted to know if kindness and genuine goodness could still be found, even in those with very little. So he had set out on an unconventional experiment to find a person who would show him kindness, not because of who he was or what he had, but purely out of compassion. As Sarah brought him his coffee, David looked up and asked, "Miss, may I ask for something? A bit unusual." Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" David hesitated, his eyes casting downward for a moment before he spoke. "Well, the truth is, I don't have much money on me today." He gestured to his worn-out wallet. "Would it be possible to get a small meal and pay later, if that's all right?" Inwardly, Sarah paused. It wasn't typical for customers to ask for credit, especially in a small diner like this. But looking into his eyes, she saw not deceit, but a hint of vulnerability that struck a chord within her. She thought of her own struggles, the times when a small act of kindness from a stranger had made a difference in her day. After a moment, she nodded with a reassuring smile. "Of course, sir," she said warmly. "Don't worry about it. I'll bring you a warm meal on the house." A glimmer of surprise flashed in David's eyes, though he quickly masked it with a grateful nod. "Thank you, miss. That's very kind of you." As Sarah went to prepare his meal, she couldn't help but feel glad that she could make even a small difference in someone's day. For her, the gesture was simple. She knew what it was like to be in need, and she was more than willing to share a little of what she had. David observed Sarah as she worked, quietly impressed. He noticed how she treated each customer with the same respect and kindness, regardless of their appearance or attitude. There was a purity in her actions that seemed rare in today's world, a warmth that shone through despite her own hardships. Little did Sarah know that her simple act of kindness had set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. As she brought David his breakfast, he looked up at her with a newfound admiration, his heart touched by her selflessness. David decided he wasn't done testing her just yet. He wanted to see how deeply this kindness ran. And so he began to plan his next visit to the diner, eager to learn more about the young woman who had shown him compassion, not knowing that he was a man of wealth and means. The following day, David returned to the diner, once again donning his disguise, a tattered jacket, an old cap that shadowed his face, and a scruffy, unshaven look that masked his true identity. He stepped through the door, moving cautiously, as if unused to such a bustling place. The quiet yet curious demeanor he carried seemed to blend with the diner's morning rush, allowing him to take a seat in a secluded corner booth where he could observe without drawing too much attention. Moments later, Sarah noticed him and approached with her usual warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Nice to see you again. Would you like the usual coffee?" David nodded appreciatively, though he looked more reserved than he had the previous day. As Sarah moved to get his coffee, David took a deep breath, feeling a slight pang of nervousness. Despite being accustomed to boardroom confrontations and high-stakes negotiations, this simple interaction felt different. This time he wasn't testing financial acumen or business skills. He was testing the strength of human kindness, and for some reason, it made his heart race in a way that was both thrilling and humbling. Sarah returned, placing the coffee in front of him with her gentle smile. "Is there anything else I can get you today?" she asked, her tone friendly and unassuming. David hesitated, fidgeting slightly before he spoke. "Actually," he murmured, glancing around as if embarrassed, "I was wondering if, well, I could possibly get a small breakfast today. I don't really have enough money at the moment." For a split second, Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She wasn't used to customers openly admitting financial troubles, especially in a place as modest as this diner. But rather than showing discomfort or judgment, Sarah's expression softened with empathy. She recalled moments in her own life when a few kind words or a small gesture of generosity had meant the world to her, and she knew that today was her chance to give back. "Oh, that's no problem at all," she said, her smile unwavering. "I'll take care of it. What would you like?" David's face registered a mixture of gratitude and surprise, his eyes meeting hers with a genuine sense of appreciation. "Just a simple breakfast, eggs and toast, perhaps?" he requested quietly, trying to contain his emotions. Sarah nodded and reassured him. "It'll be ready in just a few minutes, sir," she replied, and with that, she headed toward the kitchen. True to her word, Sarah placed his order and, with her own money from the tips she'd earned, paid for his meal. It was a small amount, but for her, it represented hours of hard work. Yet she didn't let herself dwell on that fact. Instead, she focused on the gratitude she saw in his eyes. It warmed her heart to think she might be making someone's day a little brighter, even if just by offering a hot meal. David watched as she moved from table to table, greeting each customer with the same kindness and enthusiasm, regardless of how they treated her in return. Her unwavering dedication and genuine concern for others struck him in a way he hadn't anticipated. It was clear that she wasn't acting out of obligation or for recognition. Her kindness was innate, flowing naturally from a heart that cared deeply about others. When she returned with his breakfast, David looked up, almost overwhelmed. "Thank you, miss," he said softly, his voice carrying a depth of sincerity that didn't go unnoticed. I don't know how to thank you." Sarah waved a hand, dismissing his gratitude with a kind smile. "Please don't worry about it. We all need a little help sometimes." "Enjoy your breakfast," she replied, leaving him to eat in peace. As David quietly ate, he continued to observe her, noting how she treated each customer with the same respect and warmth she had shown him. She laughed with an elderly couple, helped a family with their rambunctious children, and even listened to a young man vent about his morning mishaps, all with an open heart and genuine interest. To David, Sarah was a rarity, a beacon of kindness in a world that often felt cold and detached. Finished with his meal, David stayed for a few minutes longer, contemplating his next move. This wasn't the outcome he'd expected. He had assumed she might respond kindly, perhaps offer a little sympathy, but not at her own expense. He hadn't anticipated that she'd actually take money out of her own pocket to help him. It left him wondering about her life, her challenges, and what drove her to be so selflessly compassionate. As he made his way out of the diner, he caught Sarah's eye and nodded with a quiet thank you that spoke volumes. She smiled back, watching him disappear through the door, then returned to her duties, thinking little more of it. For her, kindness was just another part of the day. Over the following days, David continued to return, often with a different guise each time, a worn hat, a frayed coat, sometimes even a limp to add to his appearance. He began asking for small favors here and there, a cup of coffee, a slice of pie. Each time he observed Sarah's reaction, half expecting her to turn him away eventually. After all, she had her own struggles, her own financial burdens to bear. But to his amazement, Sarah never hesitated, always extending a hand of kindness, even when it seemed inconvenient for her. He noticed her coworkers giving her strange looks, some even whispering about why she would go out of her way for someone who clearly had nothing to offer in return. But Sarah simply shrugged off the comments, smiling as she continued to serve each person with the same openness and generosity. One day, another waitress, noticing Sarah's generosity, finally spoke up as she passed by. "Why do you keep doing that, Sarah? You know he doesn't have money to pay you back," she said, her tone tinged with disbelief. Sarah simply smiled, a softness in her eyes. "I don't do it expecting anything in return," she replied gently. "I just think if you have the chance to make someone's day a little brighter, you should take it. Besides, everyone has their own battles. Sometimes a bit of kindness is all it takes to give someone hope." The waitress shook her head, still unconvinced, but David, who overheard from his usual corner, felt a pang of guilt mixed with admiration. Here was a woman who gave selflessly, even when it meant sacrificing her own small comforts, simply because she believed in kindness. It was an attitude he had seen so rarely in his world, a world dominated by wealth and status, where people often forgot what it meant to care for others. At the end of that day, David left the diner feeling a mixture of admiration and respect for Sarah. She had proven to him, time and time again, that her kindness was genuine, unbreakable even in the face of hardship. It wasn't simply a facade, nor was it motivated by anything other than a pure-hearted belief in helping others. David realized he was no longer merely curious about her, he was inspired by her resilience and humility. The diner's waitress, who had unknowingly become a test subject in his little experiment, had taught him more about kindness and strength than he had learned in a lifetime. With a newfound sense of purpose, David decided it was time to reveal his identity and thank her in a way that would truly reflect his gratitude. He had come to the diner as a stranger in need, and now he would return, not as a test, but as a friend ready to change her life. Over the next few days, David returned to the diner, each time in the same worn disguise, and each time he would add a new layer to his humble appearance, a faded scarf, older shoes, a tattered coat, until he looked indistinguishable from someone truly down on his luck. He would slip into the diner quietly, always choosing the same booth in the back, where he could watch Sarah as she moved through her morning routine, greeting customers, serving tables, and somehow keeping her warm smile intact. Every visit, David would come up with small, unusual requests. One day he asked Sarah if he could have a glass of water and a piece of bread, explaining that he hadn't had a proper meal in a while. Another time he asked if he could sit for a while without ordering much, just to rest his legs. Each time Sarah responded with patience and understanding, treating him not as a burden, but as a valued guest. One morning, after placing his modest request, he overheard two other waitstaff talking nearby. "Why does she keep helping him?" one of them whispered, her voice carrying an edge of irritation. "He's just taking advantage of her kindness. She barely makes enough as it is." "Yeah," agreed the other. "If it were me, I'd have told him off by now. Who lets someone take advantage like that?" Sarah didn't appear to hear the comments, but David did. He felt a pang of discomfort, realizing that he was not only testing her kindness but also placing her under scrutiny. For a moment he wondered if he should end the test, but his curiosity won out. He had to see if Sarah's kindness would endure. He wanted to understand if her compassion truly knew no bounds, or if eventually she would decide he wasn't worth the trouble. On his 5th visit, David tried something different. As Sarah brought him his small breakfast, he asked if he could borrow a few dollars. "I'm so sorry to ask, miss," he mumbled, his voice low as though embarrassed. "I don't want to bother you, but I'm a bit short today, and I need to buy some medicine." This time Sarah's face registered a brief flicker of surprise. Asking for food was one thing, but asking for money was another. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers tightening around the bill in her pocket as she calculated her own expenses. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw only sincerity. She took a breath, reaching into her tip jar, and handed him a few dollars with a smile. "It's not much," she said, "but I hope it helps." David was taken aback. She had every reason to decline. After all, she didn't know him, and she owed him nothing. But the look in her eyes told him she couldn't ignore someone in need, no matter how inconvenient it was. The kindness she showed him wasn't about convenience, it was a principle, something deeply rooted within her. David felt a stirring of emotion, a reminder of something he had long forgotten, the impact of small acts of kindness. The following day, Sarah's colleagues confronted her directly. "Why do you keep doing this, Sarah?" one of the waitresses asked as they cleared tables together. "You know he's not going to pay you back. He's just taking advantage of your kindness." Sarah paused, setting down the plate she was holding. "Maybe he is," she replied softly, "but maybe he really does need help. And if I can make his day a little easier, even if it's just with a cup of coffee, then it's worth it to me." Her colleague shook her head, disbelief in her eyes. "But what about you, Sarah? You're the one struggling. It's not like you're rolling in money." Sarah offered a gentle smile. "I know I don't have much, but sometimes a little kindness can go a long way. I know what it's like to need help and not have anyone to turn to. If I can make a difference for him, even in a small way, then that's enough." David, who had been sitting nearby, heard every word. His heart ached as he realized the depth of her compassion. She was giving, not because she expected anything in return, but because it was simply the right thing to do. In that moment, he understood that Sarah's kindness was not conditional. She wasn't helping him out of pity or because she felt obligated. She was doing it because she genuinely cared. As the days passed, David continued his visits, each time requesting something small, a sandwich, a bit of warmth, a few minutes of rest. Sarah's patience never wavered. Even when her tips were low and her own needs pressing, she found it within herself to help him. To her, he was not an inconvenience but a person deserving of respect and kindness. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, David approached her, leaning on his cane for support. "Thank you for everything you've done, miss," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're very kind." Sarah simply smiled, brushing it off. "It's nothing, really. I'm glad I could help." But David couldn't shake the realization that he had found something truly rare in her, a heart that gave without reservation, a soul that saw value in everyone, no matter their appearance or circumstance. He felt a growing admiration for Sarah, recognizing her strength and resilience. She had touched his life in ways he hadn't expected, and he knew that it was time for him to give back. As David left the diner that evening, he thought back to his own life. The wealth he had amassed, the power he wielded, it all felt hollow in comparison to the quiet generosity he'd witnessed. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by people who sought his favor for personal gain, people who would never have spared a thought for someone in need. But here was Sarah, a young woman with so little, giving so much without a second thought. The next day he returned to the diner with a different plan. For once he didn't wear his disguise. Dressed in his usual suit, he sat down at his regular booth, waiting for Sarah to notice him. When she came over, she looked at him with surprise, not recognizing him as the man she had been helping for days. "Good morning, sir," she greeted him with her usual warmth. "Can I get you anything?" David smiled, but there was a new light in his eyes. "Actually, Sarah, I believe we've met before." She looked at him, a hint of confusion in her eyes, until he continued, "I'm David, The man you've been helping. The one you gave your hard-earned tips to." Her eyes widened in shock, realization dawning on her. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. "You're him?" she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. David nodded. "Yes, I wanted to see if kindness still existed in this world, and you showed me that it does." Sarah's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but David reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Sarah, you taught me more than any wealth or success ever could. You reminded me of the value of kindness, of giving without expecting anything in return. And for that, I owe you more than you could ever imagine." The entire diner fell silent, eyes turned toward them as David continued. "Your kindness changed me, Sarah, and I'd like to repay you by helping you achieve the future you deserve." As Sarah absorbed his words, tears filled her eyes. She had never imagined that her simple acts of kindness would lead to something so life-changing. In that moment, she realized that her kindness had not only helped David but had transformed her own life as well. With a heart full of gratitude, Sarah accepted his offer, and from that day forward, her life would never be the same. A few days after his last visit, David decided it was time to end his little test and reveal the truth to Sarah. He woke up that morning with a sense of purpose, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As he prepared, he chose a suit he hadn't worn in ages, a well-tailored, elegant ensemble that spoke of his true status. Today, he wasn't the disguised, elderly man with a battered coat and worn-out shoes. Today, he was himself, a successful businessman who had the means to change lives. And today, he would change Sarah's life. As he entered the diner in his suit, his confident stride and polished appearance drew immediate attention. The familiar faces of the waitstaff exchanged curious glances, wondering who this distinguished man might be. Even Sarah, who was busy refilling coffee mugs at another table, glanced his way, her eyes briefly locking onto his figure before she looked away, not recognizing him at first. David took his usual seat in the corner booth and waited. A few moments later, Sarah approached his table, her demeanor friendly yet formal, as she readied to take his order. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" she asked, her tone polite but devoid of the warm familiarity she'd shown to the old man she'd helped over the past days. David smiled gently, letting a moment of silence linger as he watched her. "Actually, Sarah, I believe we've already met," he said, his voice softer, yet more assured. Her brows knitted in confusion, a slight frown crossing her face as she studied him more closely. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, he continued. "I'm David, the man who asked for your help every morning, the man you gave a cup of coffee to, a meal, a few dollars, with no expectation of anything in return." Her eyes widened, the realization hitting her like a wave. She stood frozen, her expression a mixture of disbelief and shock as she whispered, "You're him? The man who?" David nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Yes, Sarah, that was me." For a moment, Sarah couldn't find the words. Her hand trembled slightly as she clutched the pen in her hand, staring at him in astonishment. The kindly, elderly man she had gone out of her way to help was, in fact, a wealthy businessman, a man who could afford to pay for more than just a single meal. The gravity of it all began to sink in, and with it, a rush of emotions. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you test me?" David's gaze softened, and he leaned forward, his voice low and sincere. "Sarah, in my world, I've met countless people who are drawn to wealth and power. I've grown wary of kindness with strings attached. I wanted to find someone who could show genuine compassion, not because they expected anything in return, but because it was simply in their nature. And you, Sarah, you showed me that kindness still exists, even in places where life is hardest. You helped me when I was just a stranger, without questioning or hesitating. You showed me a kindness I haven't seen in years." Sarah's cheeks flushed as she looked down, overwhelmed by his words. She remembered each moment she'd reached out to help him, never suspecting his true identity. She had simply seen a man in need, a person who could use a little warmth and kindness. She never imagined that he was someone who could change her life. David continued, his voice filling with admiration. "Sarah, you've reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, that real wealth isn't about money, it's about compassion. You have a heart that gives freely, even when you don't have much to give." As Sarah absorbed his words, David reached into his jacket and took out an envelope, placing it gently on the table between them. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she glanced from the envelope to him. David smiled. "This is for you, Sarah. Inside, there's a check that will cover your student loans, as well as some funds to help with your mother's medical bills. You don't have to worry about those burdens anymore." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked down at the envelope, her hands shaking. She had never expected anything like this, not in her wildest dreams. The weight of her financial struggles, the endless hours she worked to keep her family afloat, David's words and his generosity were lifting that burden in an instant, offering her a chance to breathe freely for the first time in years. But David wasn't done. He placed a second envelope on the table, a new warmth and determination in his eyes. "There's something else. I see so much potential in you, Sarah. You're hardworking, compassionate, and resilient. I'd like to offer you a job within my company, a role where you can grow, learn, and build a career that reflects the dedication you've shown here." The magnitude of his offer left Sarah speechless. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. The world around them seemed to fade as she tried to grasp the enormity of what he was offering her, a life free from financial hardship, a career that promised growth, and the security she had always dreamed of. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. I never expected. Thank you, David. Thank you so much." David reached across the table, gently placing a reassuring hand on hers. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. You've earned this through your kindness, your dedication, and your resilience. You've given so much to others, even when you had little yourself. This is just my way of saying thank you for showing me that true wealth lies in kindness and compassion." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as she looked at him, her heart overflowing with gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a real, tangible hope that she and her family could have a better life, that her dreams were within reach. David stood up, offering her a warm smile as he prepared to leave. "Take your time with the decision," he said gently. "But know that no matter what, I'll always be here to support you." As he walked out of the diner, the other waitstaff and customers stared after him, still processing what had just happened. Sarah sat in her booth, staring down at the two envelopes in her hands, her heart pounding as the reality of his offer settled in. For a moment, she felt as though she were in a dream. But as she looked around, her gaze landing on the familiar faces of her coworkers and customers, she realized that this was real. Her life had changed in an instant, all because of an unexpected encounter with a man who had seen her heart. That night, as Sarah shared the news with her family, their home was filled with tears of joy and relief. The financial burdens they had carried for so long were finally lifted, and a new chapter awaited them. Sarah knew that her life would never be the same, and she vowed to carry forward the kindness she had received, to be a light for others just as David had been for her. From that day on, Sarah went on to embrace her new career, carrying with her the lessons of compassion, humility, and the knowledge that small acts of kindness could ripple out in ways one could never predict. After David's unexpected gift, Sarah's life took a transformative turn. No longer burdened by looming debts or her family's financial struggles, she could finally breathe freely. David's generosity had lifted the weight of her past struggles, but more than that, it had given her a vision for the future, a life where she could truly thrive and provide for her loved ones. With her debts cleared, Sarah completed her college education, studying in the field of business management, a decision that felt like a tribute to the opportunity David had given her. She dove into her studies with the same determination that she'd shown at the diner, learning everything she could. Throughout this new journey, Sarah remained grounded and humble, always remembering the countless mornings she had served others with the little she had, and how a single act of kindness could ripple into something greater. Upon graduation, Sarah joined David's company in a management role. David had arranged for her to work closely with him, and under his mentorship, she quickly blossomed. She brought her unique perspective to the workplace, valuing each team member and treating everyone, from the janitors to the executives, with the same kindness she had shown in the diner. Her journey from the small diner to a bustling corporate office reminded her every day of how far she'd come. As she became more comfortable in her new role, Sarah began thinking about how she could give back. Her life had been transformed by an act of kindness, and she wanted to extend that same compassion to others. She started small, just as David had, helping her colleagues whenever she could, offering guidance, or even lending an ear to those going through difficult times. Gradually, her kindness and genuine care for others created a warm, positive environment in the office. In time, Sarah's influence grew. She collaborated with David to set up a charitable fund through the company, aiming to provide education and opportunities for people who were in situations similar to her own, struggling to make ends meet and dreaming of a brighter future. David supported her wholeheartedly, seeing in her a continuation of the kindness and hope that had originally inspired him. Sarah's initiatives expanded beyond the company. She and David began organizing monthly community outreach events, providing food, clothing, and educational resources to low-income neighborhoods. They hosted workshops on financial literacy and skill building, empowering others to take charge of their futures. Each event reminded Sarah of where she had been, but also of where she was going, and of the gratitude she felt for David, who had given her this new path. Over the years, the two became known in the community, not just as successful professionals, but as people who truly cared. Their combined influence brought hope to countless families, and their commitment to giving back became a defining characteristic of the company they worked so hard to build. They didn't just provide charity, they offered dignity and opportunity, showing people that they were valued and capable of change. The once humble waitress from a small diner now stood alongside David as an equal, a leader who inspired those around her. Yet, despite her success, Sarah never lost sight of her roots. She remained humble, always ready to roll up her sleeves and lend a hand where needed. Her journey had taught her that life's truest wealth was found in the connections we make, the people we lift up, and the kindness we show to others. In time, Sarah became a mentor to young women and men who, like her, came from modest backgrounds and dreamed of achieving more. She shared her story, not to boast but to remind them of what was possible when they combined hard work with compassion. Her life became a living example of resilience, kindness, and the power of believing in oneself. In their spare time, David and Sarah would often visit the diner where it had all begun. They'd sit at a corner booth, sipping coffee, and watching the world go by, sharing quiet conversations about life and the importance of staying grounded. For Sarah, the diner represented a chapter of her life she would always cherish, a chapter filled with lessons, struggle, and the kindness that had changed her world. Their partnership became something of a legacy. Sarah and David's story inspired countless others to see beyond wealth and status, to look for the humanity in every person they met. They reminded people that no matter one's station in life, kindness and compassion were what truly mattered. Sarah's journey had come full circle, from a young woman serving food to strangers to a respected leader, giving back to the community that had once supported her. In one of their final acts together, Sarah and David established a scholarship fund under Sarah's name, designed to support students from low-income backgrounds who showed promise and determination. They wanted to ensure that future generations would have the opportunities they needed to succeed, regardless of their circumstances. It was a lasting testament to the values they both held dear, a way to keep the spirit of kindness alive. On the day of the scholarship's inauguration, Sarah stood on a small stage in front of a crowd of students, families, and community members. She looked out at the faces before her, many of whom reminded her of herself years ago, full of dreams but uncertain of how to reach them. Taking a deep breath, she spoke from the heart, sharing the story of her journey, her hardships, and the moment that had changed everything. "And so, I say to you," she concluded, her voice steady yet full of emotion, "never underestimate the power of kindness. Sometimes the smallest act of compassion can ripple through a life in ways you could never imagine. Remember that wealth is not measured by money, but by the goodness we bring into the lives of others." The crowd rose in applause, and as Sarah looked over at David, standing beside her with pride in his eyes, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had found her purpose, a purpose rooted in kindness, resilience, and the desire to lift others up. David, too, had found what he had once lost, a renewed belief in the goodness of people and the realization that true wealth was found in the bonds we build with those around us. And thus Sarah's story came full circle. She had transformed from a humble waitress into a beacon of hope, a symbol of kindness and resilience. And as she and David continued their journey together, They knew that the impact of their actions would live on, inspiring others to believe in the power of compassion, the strength of humility, and the beauty of a life dedicated to lifting others up. Thank you for joining us for this inspiring story of kindness and transformation. Sarah's journey shows us how a simple act of compassion can change lives in unexpected ways. If this story touched your heart, please let us know in the comments, and don't forget to share it with someone who could use a reminder of the power of kindness. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that warm the heart and inspire the soul. And remember, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest ripples.